Hello and good morning and good afternoon to those of you in different time zones. We are so happy to have you here today for our third webinar in this series covering topics related to student financial aid. For those of you who may have missed our previous webinars, you can find the recorded versions online on our website. But before we get started, I do want to introduce myself to you. Before working with Eide and Bailey, I've worked in financial aid for almost 17 years. And for 14 years, I've served as a director of financial aid at different institutions such as community colleges, private and public institutions around the country. Today's webinar is focused on the 2023 compliance supplement and details what is being audited for the 2023 aid year. We will go through all the new additions to the 2023 compliance supplement and review them in greater detail. For those of you that are not aware, the compliance supplement is written by the Department of Education for the auditors as a guideline on what to look for in the single audit. We will be providing information directly from the 2023 compliance supplement, as well as referring to the Title IV regulations and the Federal Student Aid Handbook on each category. All right, the course description today is reviewing the release of the 2023 compliance supplement. Higher education institutions can anticipate some significant changes to appear in the 2023 single audit. During this webinar, we will walk you through those major changes, highlighting the best practices while working to answer questions. Over to the right, we have the learning outcomes listed below. We will focus on the changes mentioned in the 2023 compliance supplement. We will assemble the new information that is listed out in the 2023 compliance supplement. And then we will discuss any questions from other higher education institutions and discuss best practices for each category that we discuss. Below, you will see the direct link to the 2023 compliance supplement for you to review as needed or to follow along as we go. We will be providing a lot of regulatory context with each category so that you have all the information that you need to be up to date on the newest information. All right, and with that, we will get started with our first category. Our first category is federal grants. So the first grant that we will review is the Federal Iraq or Afghanistan Service Grant, which, as a reminder, is non-Pell eligible student whose parent or guardian died as a result of the U.S. military service in Iraq or Afghanistan after September 11th, 2001, you can receive an IASG grant. The change here is that the student must be less than 24 years of age or enrolled in college at the time of parent or guardian's death to be eligible. Or if 21 years old or older, enrolled in school when the parent or guardian has died. So we're going to review what the auditors are looking for here in testing this. So if the origination and disbursement data is categorized as accepted or accepted with corrections, schools must report student disbursement data within that 15 days, calendar days, after the school makes a disbursement or becomes aware of the need to make an adjustment or previously reported student disbursement data or expected student disbursement data. Next on this slide is the TEACH grant. So just a quick review on the TEACH grant. The TEACH grant is a non-need-based grant and may replace a student's EFC, but the amount of the grant that exceeds the student's EFC is considered estimated financial assistance. So previously, the regulations stated that students had to teach for 4 years within 8 years after graduating. Now the definition is changed to the student must teach 4 years within 8 years of ceasing enrollment at the institution that they received the TEACH grant from. So I'll repeat that just one more time so that we remember this one. The student is required to teach for 4 years within 8 years of ceasing enrollment at the institution that granted the TEACH grant. Also, to note the amounts and dates. So up to $4,000 a year, $3,772 if dispersed on or after October 1st, 2022 and before October 1st, 2023. So this is a reduction between the above dates. As a reminder, ensure that the amount of the TEACH grant cannot exceed the cost of attendance in conjunction with other aid. It may replace the EFC. You will want to ensure that the student is not exceeding the $16,000 cumulative for undergraduate or post-bac study. The aggregate amount for graduate level students may not exceed $8,000. And lastly, if the student is less than half-time, the amount must be reduced. So some best practices here for TEACH grants is reviewing the payment period and disbursement dates for those that have received a TEACH grant. Make sure that you review the disbursement was made in agreement with the dispersing timing requirements. Ensure that if the amount is charged to the student ledger, that the school followed the requirements for allowable current and prior year charges. Make sure to review that all required notifications were sent to the student with the amounts of the Title IV aid they are expected to receive and when they will receive the disbursement. Continuing on with the disbursement notifications, make sure that you provided the notifications to the student in a timely manner and make sure that you included the date and the amount of the disbursement in the notification with the student's or parent's right to cancel and how the student or parent would cancel if needed. Lastly, make sure that you are ensuring that if a student has a credit balance, make sure it is paid to them within that 14 days, or if the school did receive an authorization, you'll want to hold that credit balance and is not on heightened cash monitoring methods by the end of the loan period or last payment period in the award year for which the funds were awarded. All right, so we do have our first polling question coming up. And the question is, true or false? The new change to the TEACH grant is you must teach for 4 years within 8 years of ceasing enrollment at the institution that you received the TEACH grant from. True or false?
All right, and we do have one question that's come in to the Q&A box, Kristen. It's, do you have a sample engagement letter for an alternative examination engagement for certain CSL FRF recipients?
Yes, thank you. I will look into that for you. I believe that we might, but I will definitely check and get back to you on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. And I can download a report and you will have the recipient or the participant's name and email addresses in that back over.
Great. Thank you.
All right, everyone, if you are here for CPE, please make sure you are answering these polling questions that appear on your screen. Make sure your slides box is maximized so you're able to see the polling question appear on your screen, and you will answer your question right on the screen. You will click on A or B, and then you'll scroll down just a bit and make sure you hit that submit button. We'll keep it up for a few more moments and then we will continue.
All right.
All right, we are good for results. There you go.
All right. So 85% said true, and that is the correct answer. All right, moving on to our next slide is the next category we're going to discuss is the changes to COD cash management. So starting off with COD, the changes include the addition of the academic start and academic end date. So origination records must verify the academic start date and the academic end date. So the auditors will now have to verify these dates when they pull that sample. In addition to having to verify those dates, make sure that you are checking your origination records for accuracy in the following: the SSN, award amounts, enrollment dates, verification status codes when they are selected for verification, transaction number, and cost of attendance. All right, cash management. So a school requests funds from the Department of Ed under one of these methods: the advance method, reimbursement method, or heightened cash monitoring payment. So a school's participation agreement will indicate whether the institution has been placed on the reimbursement or heightened cash monitoring payment method. The compliance supplement does go into greater detailed information about what constitutes each type of payment method and what allowable practices there are for making drawdowns. For purposes of determining compliance with cash management, requirements to minimize the time between funds transfer and disbursement. A disbursement of funds occurs on the date an institution credits a student's account or pays a student directly with either Title IV funds or institutional funds used in the advanced drawing down of federal funds. So there is a lot of information included in the compliance supplement on each payment method, and it does go into greater detail on what is expected from each one here. So I highly recommend that you check the link and go into that section and read, because it does explain each one in greater detail. Okay, special test. Under special test, we will look at verification and disbursements to or on behalf of students. So starting with the verification, the compliance requirements state that a school is required to establish written policies and procedures that incorporate the provisions of 34 CFR 668.51 through 668.61 for verifying applicant information for those applicants selected for verification by the Department of Education. The school shall require each applicant whose application is selected by the Department of Ed to verify the information is required for the verification tracking group to which that applicant is assigned. So a reminder here, for the 2022-2023 award year, the requirement for verification of most FAFSA and ISER information was again waived by the Department of Education due to the COVID-19 national emergency, except for the identity, statement of educational purpose, and high school completion status, which were the tracking groups V4 and V5, as outlined in Dear Colleague Letter Gen 2206. However, this waiver does not exempt schools from resolving conflicting information if concerns arise. So for the 2023-2024 aid year, the same waiver was not extended, but there were some modifications for incarcerated students as outlined in Gen 22-09. So the objective here is whether or not you have policies and procedures in place to verify information in student aid applications for students who are selected for verification by the Department of Education. You're going to want to check whether they're going to want to check whether the school conducted verifications of selected applications, made corrections, and reported the verification status in COD in accordance with the requirements. So some things that the auditors are going to look for with this is looking to see at the school's policies and procedures outlining for verifying student applications selected for verification by the Department of Education, and verify that they are meeting the requirements of 34 CFR 668.53. They will review a sample of applications that were selected for verification by the Department of Ed and review the student aid files for those applications to ensure that the school obtained acceptable documentation to verify the information required for the verification tracking group to which the applicant is assigned, matched information on the documentation to the student aid application. If necessary, submitted the data corrections to the central processor and recalculated awards, and correctly coded the student's verification status in COD for federal Pell Grants. So some best practices here for verification is really to make sure that you have the documented policies and procedures outlining the verification process at your school. You're going to want to review the student files to make sure that you have all the correct and needed documentation per that tracking group that they are assigned. Review or create reports to check the verification code to make sure that's correct in COD. And then again, create a second review process for verification so that you have another set of eyes to look over the verification and before it was submitted and make sure that everything lines up. Moving on to the disbursements. So disbursements to or on behalf of students, a school must define the payment period for each program. And so there are 3 types of payment periods that a school may use. The payment periods that measure progress in credit hours and use standard terms, payment periods that measure progress in credit hours and use non-standard terms, and payment periods that measure progress in credit hours and do not have academic terms or for a program that measures progress in clock hours. And so the place that you can find this more in detail is 34 CFR 668.4. All right, a standard or a non-standard program can also be a subscription-based program. And so a subscription-based program is a standard or non-standard term program in which the school charges a student for each term on a subscription basis, with the expectation that the student will complete a specified number of credit hours or that equivalent during that term, right? However, classes in a subscription-based program are not required to begin or end with a specific time frame in each term. So students must complete a cumulative number of credit hours or the equivalent during or following the end of each term before receiving subsequent disbursements of Title IV funding. Now, there is an exception. So except for the fact that classes are not required to start and end within a term, the rules and the requirements for term-based programs that are not subscription-based also apply to subscription-based programs. And so there's a lot of information on this. And so to find more information on subscription-based programs, you'll want to view the FSA Handbook Volume 3 for greater detail on that. Going into the timing and appropriateness of disbursements. So as described in the regulations, schools may charge a student's ledger account with Title IV funds to pay for allowable charges associated with the payment period and prior year charges of not more than $200 in accordance with the timeframes that I'm going to talk about here in a second. So as outlined in the compliance supplement, the earliest an institution may disperse financial aid funds, with an exception of federal work study, is credit hour programs with terms that are substantially equal in length. So this is excluding those subscription-based programs, is 10 days before the first day of classes of the payment period or module for the disbursement. Credit hour programs that are not substantially equal in length, except subscription-based programs, non-term credit hour programs, or programs that use clock hours, the later of 10 days before the first day of classes of the payment period or the date that the student completed the last payment period for which they did receive that Title IV funding. Then subscription-based programs. It is the latter of 10 days before the payment period or the date that the student completed the cumulative number of credit hours associated with the student's enrollment status in all prior terms that the student attended under the definition of a subscription-based program. So there is that exception to note here on the 10-day rule does exist for direct loans and federal work study. Credit balances. So when Title IV funds are credited to a student's account and they exceed that amount of tuition and fees and then room and board and other authorized charges that is assessed by the student, a credit balance is created. So the school must pay that resulting credit balance directly to the student or parent borrower within 14 days after the first day of class of a payment period, if that credit balance occurred on or before that day, or the balance occurred if that was after the first day of class. There is a reminder here. So a school is permitted to hold credit balances if it does obtain the voluntary authorization from the student. So regardless of any authorization obtained by the institution must pay any remaining loan balance by the end of the loan period and any other remaining Title IV funds by the end of the last payment period in the award year for which those funds were awarded. All right, the testing of the return to Title IV 240-day return payment policy. So as outlined under 34 CFR 668.164, a school must have a process that ensures that student federal aid funds never escheat to a state or revert to the institution or any other third party. So a failure to have such a process in place would call into question if a school's administrative capability or its fiscal responsibility and its system of internal controls that are required by the FSA regulations. So the audit objective here is to determine if the school, number one, followed the Department of Ed requirements for timing and appropriateness of disbursements. Number two, if the school made appropriate and timely disbursement notifications. Number three, complied all the requirements for returning credit balances and returned to the Department of Education funds that it attempted to disperse after the 240 days. So some best practices here is to review your disbursement reports to check your dates and match the dates reported in COD to make sure those align, right? You're going to want to work with your business office to create policies around the 240-day timeline to make sure that this timeline is being met. And working together on this 240-day deadline is crucial for success in the timing of this process. So whether it's sharing a spreadsheet or maybe a Google Doc between the financial aid office and the business office, one office contacts the student or the parent, and then you have the timelines outlined. But either way your school does it, making sure that you meet this 240-day deadline is very important. All right, R2T4, return to Title IV. So here there are no significant changes, but there are verbiage updates for the COVID-19. So these waivers apply to payment periods that include the March 13th, 2020 through the last date of the COVID-19 national emergency. And so for schools basing their R2T4 calculations on a period of enrollment, the waiver may apply to a student who begins attendance in a payment period. That includes the last date that the national emergency is in effect and withdrawals after the conclusion of that payment period, but within the applicable period of enrollment. So the audit objective here is to see if the school correctly calculated the R2T4 funds for students who withdrew, who began attendance, allocated the return to Title IV as required, and made timely return of the funds. There is an exception here, is if the student did qualify for the return to Title IV relief under the CARES Act, or who qualified for an R2T4 exemption. Return of Title IV funds in time frame who did not begin attendance, process your post-withdrawal disbursements per the Department of Ed requirements. And then lastly, for returns not made due to withdrawals as a result of the COVID-19 related circumstances, determining that students qualified for the R2T4 relief under the CARES Act and that schools met the reporting requirements for students who qualified for R2T4 relief. The best practices here is really to implement a second review process for a return to Title IV and to review the calculations to ensure a timely return of funds. Documented policies and procedures outlining all of your institution's steps for return to Title IV, and then review each student that was granted relief under the CARES Act and document that extensively so you have that. All right, we are up for our second polling question. The question is, if an institution made an attempt to disperse aid to a student and it is not cashed, the institution has how many days to return it back to the Department of Education?
All right, everyone, we have our second polling question up. If you are here for CPE, please make sure you are answering these polling questions. Make sure your slides box is maximized so you are able to see the polling question. You will click on your selection right on the screen. You will click on A, B, or C, and then you will scroll down just a bit, and then you'll click on the submit button. Please make sure you are submitting your answers, and we'll keep this up for a few moments, and then we will continue. And Kristen, there is a question in here. It says, we are a graduate school that disperses, is it UNICEF, UNSUB? UNSUB and grad,
yes.
UNSUB and grad plus loans. Therefore, we utilize the exclusion for verification based on loan types. Are there any rules that will impact us?
That is a great question. And I am going to say there are not, but I do want to research that, and I will get in contact with you to ensure that my answer was correct on that. But that is a really good question. So I will get back to you today on that. All right.
Sorry, I was on mute. One more question that has to do with the previous slide. The 240-day timeline also refers to stale dated uncashed checks too, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Perfect, thank you. And here are the results.
All right, 240 days is the answer. Thank you all for participating in that poll question. All right, let's move on to Perkins. For those of you that still have Perkins at your institution, schools must retain promissory and master promissory notes and repayment records for each Perkins loan program. Schools are required to keep original paper promissory notes or original paper MPNs and repayment schedules in a locked, fireproof container. The original promissory notes and repayment schedules must be kept until the loans are satisfied. If required to release original documents to enforce the loan, the institution must retain certified true copies of those documents. So over on the slide, you can see that the verbiage has changed to regulations to, through inquiry and observation, evaluate the institution's Perkins loans paper records storage location and whether it is in a locked fireproof container. So what the auditors are looking for here is determining whether the school has properly maintained its Perkins loans per the regulations. So the main change here is the addition to and observation and the locked fireproof container with Perkins. Okay, moving on. All right, so enrollment reporting. Institutions are required to report enrollment information under the Pell Grant and Direct and FFEL loan programs to NSLDS. The Department of Education considers the following data elements to be high risk. So number one is the OPE ID. This is the OPE ID for the location that the student is actually attending. The enrollment effective date. The date that the current enrollment status reported for the student was first effective. The enrollment status, the student's enrollment status as of the reporting date, excuse me, and the certification date, the date enrollment that was certified by the institution. So schools are responsible for accurately reporting all program level record data elements. And so the Department of Education considers these data elements to be high risk. So things to look out for are, again, the OPE ID number, the SIP code, the SIP year, the credential level, the published program length measurement, the published program length, the program begin date, the program enrollment status, and the program enrollment effective date. Excuse me again. So really important with this is that issues with the NSLDS modernization per the compliance supplement. So as federal student aid prepared for the retirement of the current NSLDS website and the launch of the new enhanced website, FSA temporarily paused the data reporting to NSLDS. Batch reporting was accepted until July 19th, 2022, and any online updates and submittal spreadsheets were accepted until July 2022. But due to the issues encountered following the conversion, data reporting and data processing did not resume as scheduled, which impacted the institution's ability to comply with enrollment reporting requirements through at least February of 2023. So schools were expected to be in compliance with the enrollment reporting requirements for all other periods in their fiscal year. So the auditors are not expected to include any enrollment reporting data due from July 19th, 2022 through February 28th, 2023, when they are evaluating the school's compliance with enrollment reporting. So what the auditors are really looking for here is to determine whether the school is notifying the Department of Ed of changes in the student enrollment information at both the campus level and the program level in a timely and accurate manner for periods at which the school was required and able to comply with the enrollment reporting requirements. Some best practices here is to review your enrollment reporting process. Review the NSLDS enrollment reporting guide that's available on the Knowledge Center and utilize reports provided by NSLDS to review all of the above high-risk elements that we talked about earlier. In our last webinar, we went over some of the specific reports that you can get on NSLDS that will help you identify any errors and really those high-risk items up there. It will address what to look for with those. So per the regulations, an educational program is a legally authorized post-secondary program of organized instruction or study that leads to an academic, professional, or vocational degree or certificate or other recognized educational credential, or is a comprehensive transition and post-secondary program. So program eligibility is evaluated on two measures, right? Intensity of content, so your clock hours and your credit hours, and time, your academic years and weeks of instructional time. Measurement of content and time depends on how a program is delivered. So the Department of Ed recognizes 4 modes of delivering education to students. There's classroom, distance education, correspondence, and direct assessment. Those are the 4. The audit objective here is to check whether the programs offered by the school are eligible programs. And so some best practices here is to review that all the direct assessment programs are approved by the Department of Education. And then something that I do want to touch on is the clock to credit hour conversion. Ensure that you're using the correct formula for converting these clock to credit hours in all your programs that would require this calculation, right? And make sure you're reviewing them and what's on your e-car, what's on your e-car matches what is in your catalog and so forth. So just make sure that you're using the most up-to-date conversion here with these clock to credit hours. Okay, so schools may enter an arrangement with a servicer or a financial institution to make a direct payment of federal student aid credit balances to students through electronic funds transfer to a bank account that's designated by a student or a parent to issue a check payment to the student or to use an access device such as a debit card, demand, or a smart card provided by the servicer or its financial partner. So the regulations here talk about two different type of arrangements between schools and financial account providers. And so these are called the Tier 1 or Tier 2 arrangements. And whichever type your arrangement that your school has determines the provisions that are going to apply here. So we'll go over these in more detail so you have an idea. The Tier 1 is an arrangement between a school and a third-party servicer, under which the servicer performs one or more of the functions associated with processing direct payments of Title IV funds on behalf of the school, and the school or third-party servicer makes payments to one of the following. So we'll go over these for you. One or more of the financial accounts that are offered to students under the contract, a financial account where information about the account is communicated directly to students by the third-party servicer or the school on behalf of or in conjunction with the third-party servicer. And then a financial account where the information about the account is communicated directly to students by an entity contracted or affiliated with the third-party servicer. The second type of arrangement is the Tier 2, and this is an arrangement between a school and a financial institution or an entity that offers financial accounts through a financial institution, under which financial accounts are offered and marketed directly to students. So something important to note here is that requirements that apply to schools under Tier 2 arrangements differ on whether the school meets certain thresholds here. And so more information on these requirements can be found on 34 CFR 668.16. So there are required disclosures that a school must disclose on its website, the contracts establishing that Tier 1 and Tier 2 arrangement. There is an exception here, excuse me, and that is if any portions would compromise any type of personal privacy, proprietary information, technology, or the security of physical facilities. So there is that exception there. It's also important to note that there are other pieces of information that need to be disclosed on the website for both arrangements. So a school must also provide to the Department of Education an up-to-date URL for the contract for the publication in a centralized database accessible to the public. So unless the school has a Tier 2 arrangement under the threshold, the URL must include the contract data. And this is important because, well, I'll go into that in one second, but the FSA handbook does go into greater detail about what needs to be disclosed here. Also, there is a Dear Colleague letter, Gen 22-14, provides additional guidance on both of these arrangements. The audit objective here is determine if the school is using a servicer or a financial institution to deliver the Title IV balance refunds and if the regulations are being followed. So some best practices here are to ensure that you have that URL on your website. This URL should lead to the contract between the school and the financial institution on the website. So sometimes we will see that you just link to the site of the third-party servicer, but there's no contract. You need to be able to directly link to the contract on your website. Okay, moving on to incentive compensation. So a school in its PPA or program participation agreement, it will not provide any commission, bonus, or any other incentive payment based in any part, directly or indirectly, upon success in securing enrollments or the award of financial aid to any person or entity who is engaged in any student recruitment or admission activity, or in making decisions regarding the award of Title IV program funds. There is a Dear Colleague letter. It's Gen-11-05. And this does include a question and answer that covers all of the incentive compensation, and it does provide additional information. So I highly recommend that you look at that and read it. The audit objective here is to determine if the school complied with the ban on incentive payments to any person in the admissions, recruiting, financial aid, and register office, or any kind of equivalent to these offices that your school may have, and that the institution relies on to recruit, admit, and enroll its students, or to award Title IV funds or any contracted entity engaged in the student recruitment, enrollment, or admission activity in making decisions regarding the award of Title IV funds. All right, we're going to move into SAP. So schools must establish and publish reasonable standards for measuring whether eligible students are maintaining satisfactory academic progress, or SAP, in their educational program. The school standards are considered reasonable if the SAP policy is the same as or stricter than the policy for a student enrolled in the same program that is not receiving Title IV student financial aid. Provides for consistent application of standards to all students within categories of students and educational programs. Provides for that the student's academic progress to be evaluated at the end of each payment period if the educational program is either one academic year in length or shorter than an academic year, or for all other educational programs at the end of each payment period, or at least annually to correspond with the end of a payment period. It does need to include a qualitative component, which generally consists of grades that are measurable against a norm, and a quantitative component, where applicable, that consists of a maximum time frame for completion of the educational program. Provides a policy that at the time of each evaluation, the student has not achieved that required GPA, is not successfully completing their program of study at the required pace, if that's required, or has not completed the program within the maximum time frame, they no longer eligible for Title IV aid. Provides specific procedures for disbursements to students on financial aid warning status or financial aid probation status. If the school permits the student to appeal a determination, providing specific procedures how the student may reestablish eligibility to receive their Title IV aid, basis on which a student may file an appeal, and information that the student must submit regarding why they failed their satisfactory academic progress and how they have changed that will not allow that student to make satisfactory academic progress at the next evaluation. I said not, it should be now. So I want to repeat that again. That will now allow the student. So how they can regain that eligibility. If the school does not permit the student to appeal a determination, describes how a student may reestablish their eligibility to receive Title IV, and provides the notification to students of their results of an evaluation that does impact their eligibility for Title IV. So the overall objective here is to ensure that the school's SAP policy is meeting all of those regulatory requirements that I just went through so that it is considered to be reasonable. So the best practice here is to really review your SAP policy to make sure that you're meeting all of those requirements listed above, and that you do have it listed so that it's available for students to read and that they understand everything that we just went through about eligibility. Additional locations. So the ECAR, the Eligibility and Certification Approval Report that the Department of Ed sends to your school, lists all the location where students are eligible for Title IV funds. All schools are required to report to the Department of Ed when adding an additional accredited and licensed location where they will be offering 50% or more of an eligible program if the institution wants to disperse FSA program funds to students that are enrolled at that location. So as a reminder here, schools must not disperse federal student aid program funds to students at a new location before the institution has reported that location and submitted any required supporting documents to the Department of Education. The audit objective here is to determine if the institution's locations have been approved as eligible for participation in the Title IV programs, and if the institution submitted notice or an application for approval of additional locations as required. Okay. All right. And GLBA. There is a lot on GLBA to discuss. And so, excuse me, we will focus on the highlights that are required. So GLBA requires financial institutions to explain their information sharing practices to their customers and to safeguard sensitive data. And this can be located more in detail on 16 CFR 314. On December 9th, 2021, the FTC issued final regulations to implement the GLBA information safeguarding standards that institutions must implement. And so most of you have probably been made aware of this already. You've probably reviewed your processes and policies, but these regulations significantly modify the requirements that institutions must meet under GLBA and established minimum standards. So institutions were required to be in compliance with the revised requirements no later than June 9th of 2023. So again, this is already passed, and I'm sure most of you have already reviewed your policies, but some things here to note. There are 8 minimum safeguards that the Written Information Security Program must address. And so we're gonna summarize those as we go through. Implement and periodically review access controls, conduct a periodic inventory of data, noting where it's collected, stored, or transmitted, encrypt customer information on the institution system and when it's in transit, assess apps developed by the school, implementing multi-factor authentication for anyone accessing customer information on the institution system, dispose of customer information securely, anticipate and evaluate changes to the information system or network, and maintain a log of authorized users' activity and keep an eye out for unauthorized access. So the objective here for the auditors is to determine whether the institution designated a qualified individual responsible for implementing and monitoring the institution's information security program, and then determine whether the institution's written information security program addresses the required minimum 7 elements. So some things to check here, and they're listed on the slide, is there a qualified individual? Is there a written security program that addresses certain requirements? What about risk assessment? And when is that being conducted? And how often is that being conducted? 8 minimum safeguards that must be addressed in the safety program. Regular tests, are they set up? Policies and procedures put in place, and who, where are these located, making sure they outline all of the new regulations within these policies and procedures. Oversight of its information system, and must include evaluation and adjustment as needed. So there is a lot more on GLBA. It's a lot of in detail So please go to the compliance supplement that was linked in the first slide to review all the new updates to GLBA. Like I said, the deadline has passed on this, but take the time and read that because it does outline it in greater detail. All right, and we are on our last polling question of our webinar. And our question is, what is the minimum number of safeguards that are in the written information that a security program must address?
All right, everyone, our third polling question is up. If you are here for CPE, please make sure you are answering these polling questions. Make sure your slides box is maximized, and then you will be able to click submit. You will click on A, B, or C right on the screen, and then you will scroll down a bit. You'll see the submit button. You'll click submit. Make sure you are submitting your answers so they will count, and we'll keep it up for a few more moments and then we will continue.
And as a reminder, all of our previous webinars are located on the Eide Bailey website. There were 3 that we did throughout the summer, so you can go back and review those. Our last one was on the top audit findings for student financial aid. So some of this may be a repeat from our last webinar. Let's see. Looks like we're almost there on the polling question. If you haven't answered it, please go ahead.
All right. Looks like we are good. I will now present you with the results.
All right. And 54.3% got it right. There are 8 minimum safeguards that the GLB requires that the program must assess. All right, so it looks like we are open for questions, and it looks like we do have a new one. Yes, so more information on the cash drawdowns. So let's see here if I can go back to that slide. Okay, so
you can actually go to those little boxes, and if you see it, just click on it and then you can push it out so you don't have to go through all the slides.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm answering the question more or correctly. So I'm assuming you want to know more about the timing and appropriateness of disbursements or credit balances, or was it more about cash management in greater detail there? I'm thinking it's probably more of the timing and things. Okay, so I think we're back here on special test here. And so looking at this, I just want to make sure that I answer the question right. It talks a lot about the standard or non-standard programs here. Let's see. And we talked about the timing and appropriateness of disbursements. So we talked about when you can pay, whether it's 10 days before the first day of classes, or the payment period or module for the disbursement. So we went into that. We talked about what is a subscription-based program. The compliance supplement does go into greater detail about the cash management, and it does explain everything that we're going over here. That link is in the first slide. So if I don't answer your question, I definitely want to make sure that you know where to look there. Let's see here. And then we talked about credit balances. So when Title IV funds are credited to the student account, we want to make sure that we pay that balance within 14 days, the first day of class of a payment period, if the credit balance occurred on or before that day, or the balance occurred if it was after the first day of class. We went over that a little bit. And then we did talk about the 240-day return payment policy. So we wanted We talked about how we want to make sure that schools are meeting that 240-day timeline with return to Title IV, or checks that have not been cashed need to be returned within that 240 days. So I hope that I got your question. If I didn't, again, the link to the compliance supplement is on the first slide, or you can reach out to me and I will definitely provide you more information specifically on what your question was. But that is all that we have for today. I appreciate everybody attending. If you would like for us to reach out, please let us know. I can send you an information. We can set up a quick call and see what needs you may have or questions that you may have about our webinars. But we appreciate you attending. And I think that's it. I think we don't have any more. Oh, it looks like we might have some.
Can you elaborate a little more on the enrollment reporting? I am currently undergoing a single audit and enrollment reporting has come up.
All right. So enrollment reporting, yes. So we have a lot of enrollment reporting on our last webinar that we had that's available on our website. But some things to note here is the NSLDS enrollment reporting guide is a great tool. It does go through all of the pieces of enrollment reporting and what is looked for, how to address any errors with the statuses between withdrawal and graduation status, and some specific reports that you can pull to see if there's any type of errors and how to correct those. It does go through the timelines of what needs to be submitted with your error reports and corrections and responses like that. So I highly recommend that you do look at the NSLDS enrollment reporting guide. It does cover that a lot. I also can reach out to you after this webinar and address any other specific questions you have about enrollment reporting. It is a big, big subject, and we can definitely go through that. We have a question about the GLBA policy it does have to be posted, yes, on a forward-facing website. That is correct.
And it looks like we have time for one more.
So the 240-day timeline does begin at that first disbursement, yes. So you'll want to make sure that you're keeping track of those checks and then deadlines. I always recommend creating a spreadsheet and sharing it between the business office and financial aid, and really setting those dates. And when you get to the checkpoint, making sure that if you don't have a response from the student or the parent borrower, then you move on to your next policies and procedures and how to handle that. And the last question. Oh, okay. All right. So for those of you that I owe a response to, I will get a response to you by the end of today. I look forward to talking to you all more about your questions. Thank you so much for attending our webinar. And I think we are good.
Thank you so much, Kristen.